Good afternoon. This is Eric Mucklow at the headquarters of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Welcome to the Sustainability and Energy webinar series, sponsored by the Engineering and Construction Division here at headquarters. Today, our presentation is on a sustainable civil works. We will highlight a new initiative to mainstream large-scale sustainability concepts, governance, guiding principles, and design from land planning to operations and maintenance of our built infrastructure. Sustainability is an attribute of dynamic, adaptive systems that will evolve and grow in the face of constant change. Ms. Heather Morgan will help us not look at what we build as just fixed assets, but as continually changing processes. Heather Morgan currently serves as the Civil Works Sustainability Program Manager at headquarters, and she has worked in the field of landscape architecture, land planning, and landscape archaeology for over 10 years before joining USACE back in 2009 in the New York district. She applies a transdisciplinary strategy in analyzing water resources, redefining relationship between human and natural systems. Again, for those newcomers, if you would like continuing education credits or LUs, learning units for architects, send your AIA number to the email address at the bottom of the screen. After downloading a quiz at the website, you must answer the questions on the quiz correctly to get the credit. It'll be submitted for you if you submit your membership number. Again, we do these in batches of 5, so you have to attend 5 webinars and send in the consolidated quizzes for credit. I'm going to switch over to presentation and let Ms. Morgan take it away as soon as it comes up. Okay.
Okay, hi Eric, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just real quick, everybody thank you for signing in. I'm in a new interface that Eric introduced me to this morning. So if I'm a little clunky or clumsy with it, please, I apologize in advance. Thanks, Eric, for inviting me to be a part of the webinar series. The civil work side and the military side is going to start moving forward and get, I would say, a little bit more energy behind merging what you guys have had, the expertise and practice of implementing and moving and kind of transforming it over into civil works for sustainability. The second thing I would like to say on top of that is I'm aware that probably many of you that are dialed in on this phone have been a part of the early stages of civil works sustainability and the rough and clunkiness that's been. And so for any of you that are in the sustainability program manager positions at the division, anything on the operations side of the house that's been really trying to do the tangible nature of energy and water conservation. First off, I want to say thank you. Secondly, I definitely want to emphasize the importance of your role moving forward as we add dimension to civil works sustainability for our entire water infrastructure program for the agency. So again, this is going to be a little clunky and there's a little bit of delay on the slides, and I think even my mic is a little delayed. So please stop me at any point in time and correct me. I see a few people on there that I know. Hi, Mr. Simon Fett. It's really nice to see you logged in. I appreciate you dialing in. It's been a while. So, all right. So I had given this presentation. I actually put this presentation together before I was in this position. And my first week in the position, Steve Deloach, when he was still the deputy, had asked me to give this presentation to ERDIC and the ENC community of practice. Since then, it's kind of evolved. There's still some slides in here that are about a year old. There's some new information in here. And by the end of August, I'll have a total rehaul of this presentation that's going to be inclusive of probably the last 6 months of work and some of the awesome participants that I've had on some of the early stages of our teams. So as it states here on the front slide, what I really want to do is kind of all of us disappear for about an hour. Hopefully I won't be talking that whole hour, but for all of us to really start to say to ourselves, what do we think our civil works program will look like in 100 to 250 years? And what does that mean? And depending on what your discipline is, or what other disciplines you're surrounded by on your PDTs, start to conceptualize that and put your trajectory on a long shot for me so that you have some agility and freedom in this conversation that I think we all would really like to have. So when we start looking at what the core does at its baseline condition, the origin of the core and its first missions and everything like that, there's something that I think that we really need to have a sense of humility with that I'm sure all of you relate to on this phone. But for those of you that haven't seen these maps, these were done by the River Commission in the early 40s, and it's basically mapping of ancient courses for the Mississippi River. And I think if you look at this and you understand that these things have been around for millions of years, and you look at its dynamic system, you have to start to admit to yourself as an agency that what we're tasked to do is extremely difficult, because we're asked to put static things on systems that are this dynamic and this strong. And at some point, we are also not only asked to put static measures on that, but we have a tendency in the American landscape to inhabit around these features. Water, as we all know, for anyone with an anthropological background, knows that water is the veins of inhabitation. We also now know water is consumption and lots of other great things, trade and commerce and transportation. So when we look at this and we start to couple it with land use plans and land use management, we start to say to ourselves, not only does our agency have a difficult task at hand, but so does the rest of our American terrain and how we decide to manage our land and water. I'm waiting on the next slide, sorry. So if I simplified all of that and I put it in an equation for those of you that think more linear, I can't talk, sorry, in a linear way rather than a spatial connection or a systemic way, I would say that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers equals static measures on dynamic water and landscapes. And that then in tandem equals creation of landscapes of both benefit and potential conflict for human inhabitation. Now we all can admit that the water infrastructure that we've built that's nested in these natural systems, we've collected the benefits of large-scale risk reduction for a long time. But what we're starting to look at and realize is based on population increases, over-expenditure of finite resources, tight fiscal landscape environments, as well as the money to O&M any of these things for the life of the structure, we all start to realize that this chronic burn in the background is something that might not be long-term and sustainable. So what I did is a very little clunky quick grab on Google Earth of an aerial of Memphis and just superimpose it over the ancient courses mapping. And just to give us an idea of this is the type of behavior that's occurred beneath the contours where we've nested cities, and that small Army Corps castle at the bottom is actually where our Memphis district is located. So even as a community and an agency where we place our offices, obviously relative to the water, and that's important, but we're still nested in this, whether we're talking about our physical office or us as an American complex. I'm sorry, I'm waiting on the next slide. So I'm sure some of you guys have seen this quote from Mark Twain before. I'm just going to read it out loud real quick. One who knows the Mississippi will promptly aver, not aloud but to himself, that 10,000 river commissions with the minds of the world at their back cannot tame that lawless stream, cannot curb it or confine it, cannot say to it, go here, go there, and make it obey, cannot save a shore for which it has sentenced, cannot bar its path with an obstruction which it will not tear down, dance over, and laugh at. But a discreet man would not put these things into spoken words. I think we as an agency build water infrastructure around us, which I think at times has a lot more of a significant impact or ripple effect than just words. So this is from a book called Natural Capitalism, and this is optimizing components in isolation tends to pessimize the whole system. You can actually make a system less efficient while making each of its parts more efficient, simply by not properly linking up those components. If they're not designed to work with one another, they'll tend to work against one another. So anyone that's dealing with infrastructure, whether it's water or vehicular or anything along these large-scale lines, whether it's structural integrity or if you look at it in the complexity of like the safety programs, you start to realize that if we narrow in and start to look at these in these silos or in these small chambers and not understand their relationship with each other or their interdependency, we can tend to actually put a lot of effort in the wrong places. So to sum all that up, I try to put it in this simple slide that basically says, here's your challenges facing the Civil Works program if we start to look out several years into the future. So you have a polarized political landscape plus a restrictive fiscal landscape. You have these other impacts that are coming into the system that are climate variability, water supply, we have groundwater extraction, city subsidence, we have population increase, etc. And then we have this cultural identity dimension that has America developed a culture informed of water infrastructure? Are we consumptive based? Are we at a disposable ease with water? Do we understand where our water comes from? Is our inland navigation system invisible to the average American? And if you take all of that and you try to equal that into something, your baseline condition says that, hey, Civil Works program and the early stages of our feasibility study, the whole planning spectrum or the whole planning phase of our Civil Works program actually becomes extremely responsible and very important for what we place in these contours and in the water. So if you really transcend that into, well, what you plan is what you build, and then is also what you take care of for the life of the structure, you instantly understand that the life cycle of a project, planning and engineering in general, has to start to have a much more reciprocal relationship. So let's look at the things that we've built throughout the country. And I also like to start these slides off with denoting the fact that I am fully aware, as much as all of us, that many of the features we've built throughout our landscape have saved lives and reduced a lot of risk. The point intent of these slides is for us to actually start to look at them, lift our heads up, and start to look at them as if they're going to stay there a very long time. And what we've built, what does it represent about our values? So I used to joke around for people that have known me for a few years that if I was an alien and I came in from outer space and I looked at what we have built as a country, whether it's our agency or other agencies, I would start to say to myself, well, what does this represent? What does this represent about our values? And why are these people, why are these humans on Earth, basically, why do they have a combative relationship with water? Why have they earthen-forded themselves around and separated themselves from water when water is the veins for inhabitation? And so then if we start to look at it from a cross-section standpoint as well, and we look at places such as New Orleans, where we have, if you look at this cross-section, you can see the structures that we've built. You can see the water level to the right. You can see the home and the residential components to the left. And what we can say about this cross-section is we understand as an agency how we got here. I would like to say, and I think all of you would like to say, is that we can do better than this. We're smart enough. We are innovative enough. We can do better than this. But we certainly can't do it alone. So here's some other elements where we can look at. And if you really start to look at this and you say, what does this say? What does it say about our program? What does it say about us as Americans? What else could we build and design that would be more dynamic than this static measure that we've placed here? Sorry, I'm waiting on the slide. I don't want to click it again. There we go. So even looking at the land use patterns in this, which we all know that land use is out of our abilities to work with, but we should be able to recommend and help guide it at times. But if this, this complex site, which I would not want to speak at all for dam safety, and I'm not sure if anyone from the dam safety program has logged in today, and they could probably speak much more intelligently about it. But this is a very complex site. And if we start to look at this, you can see the green space, you can see the dam feature and its kind of circular arced form. You can see the land use abutting it on the bottom left-hand corner that looks a little bit like mixed use or like multi-density. And then we start to look at this like other side, the right side, that has kind of an operationalized look to it. And then in the center down the spine, we have this narrowed channel for the flow of water. And if we pull our memory back to the slide earlier on how rivers behave, and we look in the way in which we've nestled around this for the benefit of the water, to harness the power of the water for consumptive needs as well as risk reduction, we're basically nestling around a relationship that we're not sure how long we can maintain it. And so I think we all know, whether we want to admit it or not, some of the things that we've built and some of the directions that we're going with some of our projects it could potentially and is not sustainable. So these items are from a book that I've been reading for the last year and a half that I keep rereading, and it's called Dreaming for the Future. And one of the things that it lists in there is kind of this comprehensive look at how Americans view water and how we kind of have come out of this industrial revolution, that we moved into this environmental enlightenment, and that now we're in this phase called post-industrial values, where we're trying to merge the values that we got out of environmental enlightenment with the responsibility of the industrial revolution, of all that we consumed, all that we expand, and how do we retain some of it, but build some of it to be much more of a hybrid. And so as you can see, the things that I really enjoy in this is the myth 1, human dominance over nature, that presumes that we know enough to manage the planet, even though we can't manage the back 40. And myth 2, that an economy can grow forever in a finite planet, and that's corollary to that human happiness is a byproduct of consumption. Sorry, there's a delay. Eric, I need to get better at clicking my slides earlier. So some of these other concepts that float, if you start to really look at a large-scale application of sustainability, is to make the human presence in the world on nature's terms and not just on human contrivance. Obviously, we have some ecological dimension and environmental stewardship to this. And then the fourth one is creation of durable economies calibrated to the realities of ecology, physics, constructive law, and risk. And so why would we need to embrace this new approach? So I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the Coors Ecosystem Restoration Project on the Kissimmee River out of the Jacksonville district. And so we learned from lessons from that at one point we understand that the retrospective of the agency was that it was okay to straighten things. And it was okay to try and control flood, and then to actually, do flood risk management instead of try to say that we're doing flood control. And so I think we all know that the next generation of infrastructure needs to have a whole new set of principles. So the intent of the large-scale civil works sustainability mission is to start to write those guiding principles, to start to write a vision and a mission statement, and for us to start to strategize over a large plane how we plan on doing these things. So some of the more recent development for this team that I'm working with, I have a very small team right now. We will be expanding, and we will certainly be asking people for a lot of input and review of any of the type of early documents that we're producing. But there's a few concepts that we need to really talk about openly. The second one down, I'm going to jump to that one, the post-industrial value system. I kind of explained that earlier. And if you guys have more questions on that, or if you've read about that and how you view that, please ask me later on. I love talking about that topic. The first one up there, the natural system hosts human infrastructure. This is a concept that I was explaining and having a great conversation with Karen Baker about a couple weeks ago. And ultimately, we have a disconnect on our interdependency between the natural system and the human infrastructure system. And what that means is that if the natural system is not healthy, no matter what you build in your human infrastructure system, no matter what you build, it will eventually fail as well, because the host is the natural system. And so a lot of times at headquarters, I try to simplify this so that I can keep my my brain straight in having these types of conversations, these ephemeral conversations, is that if you were to say that the natural system was a retaining wall, and that behind it you had these elements of chronic burn that were water scarcity, ecosystem degradation, the complexity of climate variability, and all these things, other things that we mentioned earlier, right? And if that retaining wall behind that has all these chronic burns that you may not be seeing the consequences associated with them now, and if we continue to lag bolt into the front of that retaining wall, it doesn't matter how good that lag bolt is. It doesn't matter how resilient that lag bolt is. If that wall, being the natural system, is basically continuously being undermined, it will all eventually collapse. And so what we need to do is we need to realize that if we can keep these natural systems healthy or improve their state of health now, that is a long-term national security for any water infrastructure that we propose throughout this country. And so that's where you get to the third bullet here, is where we need to take the term sustainability and we need to pull it out of the 60s, and we need to pull it out of the environmental enlightenment. And we need to grab all the efforts that have already been going on at the core for sustainability and all of that work. And we need to slide that word up there in equal or even higher than the hot and sexy word resiliency right now, and couple it with national security. And so we need to create this environment of sustainable security for our nation. It's not just about building infrastructure. It's about actually making sure that our nation is secure for several generations forward. And so right now, we're working on the descriptions of what is sustainable security? What does it look like? What are the components to it? And so these are just notes over the last, 6-8 months, where some of these are pertaining to actual design elements, how design should be agile, nimble, and quick and dynamic. Also, you can see that this sustainable security is mentioned there as well. This idea that, you need a form of evolutionary resiliency where you're not returning to the previous sense of equilibrium, that you're actually, you're bouncing back to a new equilibrium that's informed by the adaptation that occurred when the impact came in that tested your resiliency. And that adaptation, that information actually informs your long-term trajectory of sustainability. Another thing that our team's working on right now is really trying to describe the relationship between resiliency and sustainability, and how important it is that our agency, due to the business lines and the work that we do, that we understand that and have full thoughtfulness and awareness of what that entails, and at certain times, resiliency is going to dominate a landscape, and sustainability might not. And at other times, sustainability will, and resiliency will have to move back into the boundary of sustainability, where we actually work on making other elements that we've built or measures that we've built more resilient, but further back and away from the water. So as we see, this is the Kissimmee River. And from a landscape archaeological perspective, I always love this photograph because you can actually see the tangible nature and marks on the landscape that we've recovered from. And then you can actually see the original definition of resiliency, which was born out of ecology, describing how well an ecosystem bounces back from a disruption. You can actually see that in the layers there. And so the intent here is, as well, what will you say services and program look like in 25, 100 years? And so I don't know, for those of you that have been to Angkor Wat, I have yet to go. I'm dying to go. But what I don't want, and I'm sure all of you, I don't want people coming and visiting America and saying they were incredibly water engineered, but they're not here anymore, or only a portion of their quality of life is still here. And I would rather us not be a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So we all know the traditional definitions of sustainability. We are working on one right now for the Civil Works program at this large-scale dimension. Sorry, I'm waiting on the next slide again. And so when you start to move and you say, okay, great ideas, Heather, real great, lots of energy behind this. Well, how do you actually give it traction at the core? And so a lot of times for myself, maybe it's because of being a landscape architect, I have to divide things that are ephemeral into scales of thought and scales of implementation. So very early on, I broke up the different ways that we could start civil works as large-scale sustainability, and I put them at different elevations. So there's a 6-foot elevation, there's a 3,000-foot elevation, and 30,000. And on this next slide, you're going to see those thoughts actually put into the 3 different scales. So the 6-foot elevation, the only reason that I put it at 6 foot is because often our vertical structures are at our human and dwelling scale. People feel more associated with them. People definitely feel more comfortable at times, building an extension onto their house versus having someone come out and really help them with the large-scale stormwater management issue. When you start to go horizontal in the landscape, understandably so, because I think of the influence of natural system, it can get overwhelming. And so I put the vertical scale for a lot of the initiatives that Eric and you guys have all been doing on the military side of the house, as well as our sustainable billing policy and everything new and everything that's been counted and tracked and reported back to Ms. Darcy in the sustainability plan, a lot of your energy and water conservation initiatives that have been going on for several years. And I put it at this scale because it's very much within people's visibility. We already have existing guidelines and federal systems for evaluating and rating these structures, as well as measuring the amount of energy and water that they're conserving. And so this scale is, I think, pretty straightforward. The only reason I think it's straightforward is people have put a lot of time and energy into making it very visible to people. The next scale up is 3,000. And so this is, if you go up in elevation, you're going to go out in your horizontal scale. So at this point, you would nest a site-specific civil works project just by its footprint. But as you start to get into this 3,000-foot elevation, you start bringing in a lot of complex layers, right? As we mentioned before, you have societal demands, you have political demands, you have natural resources, you have ESAs, you have non-fed sponsors, you have water rights, a water scarcity issue right now in the West, and we're all exposed to what this range of complexity is, so I'm not going to make us tired with that. And so the last scale is the 30,000-foot elevation. And this is so bumping your camera lens all the way up to how is this large system, this entire country, how does the natural system function and behave, and where are core projects nested in there, and what is the relationship between each other? Not just what is this site, but upriver, downriver, and in many other directions. What are some of our climate conditions and our meteorological events, like atmospheric rivers, things like this? How are they influencing what we're doing? Are we keeping track of them? Are we researching them? And how can we take that information and hopefully one day make it useful, even though right now it seems completely unattainable? So if I slid all that onto one slide, you would have this. And as you can see, Kay White likes to say little s to big S. That's that red arrow on the left. You can also see on the left that a higher elevation equals a larger horizontal application. And so the limited group that I have listed in these elevations is kind of just because not to clutter up the slide. It's already got a ton on it. But that's really, I just threw up certain initiatives I knew going on right now. Or this actually was over a year and a half ago, in that where would they be nested? The important thing about all this, I think, is that none of these elevations stay static. Nothing that's nested in any of these layers has to retain itself at that elevation. That the only way we're going to be sustainable is if from the literally from the ground up, to reprogramming our senior leaders about how they view sustainability, how they view water, what are their national priorities, and how can we start to use sustainability to help them reach that, right? I mean, if we really did this right, we would be changing the way in which we fund our projects, potentially. That would go all the way up to conversations with ASA and OMB. It comes all the way down to actually what we build in any type of installation. This all funnels into asset management and infrastructure strategy. We have an excellent climate adaptation team that's put out great tools for planning to start using sea level rise calculators and basically a lot of tools, vulnerability index models, for us to understand how is this natural system behaving, helping us to determine our future without project conditions before we place an alternative down. And then we have an awesome new initiative with resiliency that's getting a ton of energy. I'm sure some of the people on this call have contributed to that, and if you haven't, you should, because we need a lot of eyes on that, and its relationship with sustainability. So once you start sliding all that together and you couple it underneath a title of sustainable security, you start to say that it's not just about civil works sustainability. The flip on that would be, this is how you get a sustainable civil works program. And then the flip on the next thing would be, this is our civil works program. This is just how we do things. And we're not doing it because it's good for the environment and it's good for green, fluffy things. We're doing this because we want our nation to be safe and secure, and we want a certain quality of life that we need, and we have to start understanding these relationships. And the medium of what we build in water infrastructure has to represent that spread of values. And so I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Simon Sinek. We start with why. But essentially, for large-scale civil works sustainability, we would have to follow all of this under one big why and many scales of how, and our diversity in what, on what you do at your desk when you print a piece of paper, to what we go to when we're sitting in Mr. Dalton's office explaining the important relationship between sustainability and resiliency. So I think this last slide, the next slide is my last slide, and I think it's just a discussion placeholder. So thanks for putting up with that dump. I haven't eaten lunch today, so I might sound a little spacey. So I appreciate you putting up with my energy level. But Eric, I don't know how you guys handle questions or discussion or anything like that, but I'm going to be quiet because I've been speaking for 27 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. You can take a drink if you need to. I'm going to ask the people who are thinking about questions and things to type them in the box that next to the send button on the lower right-hand corner of their screen, in the chat box. They will type their questions in there, and I'll read them aloud to you, Heather, for the sake of the recording, and also to organize them so that we might have some duplicates and things like that. All right, so the first one here we have you considered the Envision rating tool for civil works projects?
Yes, we are looking at that as one of the options. I'm not sure who asked this, and maybe Annette, and I don't know if you've had experience with the Envision tool. There is a pretty wide cross-section of opinion on how good of a tool it is. I think the only way that we would be able to know if it's a good fit or not is we would need to pilot it. I know that dam safety programs are interested in piloting some form of rating tool for horizontal infrastructure. I guess in our civil works sustainability strategy, we have first tier, second tier, and third tier actions. And so figuring out what is our best rating tool, or trying several of them and piloting them and seeing what the result is, that is a first tier action. That is a priority of Mr. Dalton as well. The other thing that's out there is there's a lot of work being done. Dewberry came in a couple weeks ago. Mike Walsh, General Mike Walsh, was actually there as well as part of their team. He works for them now. or as a consultant for them now. And we were looking at a sustainable return on investment. They keep calling it, I think, SROI. And so that was an excellent representation of like, how do you necessarily, like the approach on there was monetizing some of it and some of the values you don't monetize. So yes, I'm aware of Envision, and if you have any critical insight or you've tried it yourself or anything like that, please feel free to email me. We have a lot to learn, and our response is only going to be as good as the amount of people that help me with it. So thanks for that question. What's the next one?
The next one, Heather, is there currently a Civil Works sustainability implementation plan?
Okay, so as I mentioned before, we have a lot of different initiatives going on that I think we could, tag as sustainable. We also have a lot of things that are going on that are sustainable activities that we're not giving ourselves credit for. And I don't know if we're giving them the visibility to our senior leaders that they deserve. So one is there a Civil War Sustainability Implementation Plan? The small team that I have right now, just to give you an idea, we are drafting a vision statement, a mission statement, and a strategic plan. Part of that strategic plan, as I mentioned earlier, is those first, second, and third tier actions, and those would be more along the lines of implementation. To be very fair, I feel you can't really write a thoughtful implementation plan until you've actually done the work to help with a cultural identity shift. So part of this is of the Civil Works sustainability strategy. A large part of this is a communication strategy on that. Even in our discussions with our vision statement, we went with a little bit more of a traditional vision statement. And then the last like month or so, I probably made my team really tired. We kind of started tearing it apart, and the vision statement's much more on the lines of we're completely changing the way we do business. And hopefully people will like that. It's not approved yet, so that's why it's not up here. But that's the direction we're going. So yes, we want an implementation plan, but first we need to really start to recognize the things that would feed into that. We need to really exercise post-industrial value systems and kind of define that for what it is for the core. We need to identify our relationship with climate change, risk, as well as resiliency and other things. And so I think once we can kind of couple all that together, I would love to implement it as fast as we can. Anything else?
Yeah, basically, similar to take some of these questions a little further. Without the Envision rating tool, are there other tools that you're looking at or other more internal processes that you look to evaluate your projects?
No, like I mentioned right now, we're looking, we just were introduced to that SROI, that Sustainable Return on Investment. And I guess one of these things with measuring, and Eric, maybe you guys can comment on this, because I know on your side of the house you kind of struggle with some of this or have struggled with in the past. I think when you don't know exactly what you're measuring, you're just measuring to measure. So I think at times, like how we view what we build and its relationship with the site, its relationship with the things that are nested around it, and its relationship with the other features that are up and down the water body or across the water body or on the coastal edge. I think measuring it is going to be necessary. I guess for me right now, I'm more concerned with getting it up off the ground. And then once we've got it up off the ground and have it agreed on the spectrum that we're going in, then we identify the tools to measure it. I think I made Steve Deloach tired my first 6 months in the position because he kept telling me, Heather, you need to give a definition for large-scale civil works sustainability. We need a definition. We need a definition. And I was like, no, I need to figure out all these moving parts and all these satellites that other people are doing. Identify the voids, and then come up with a definition. But I really felt like an inventory needed to be done. So So no, I need more tools, and if any of you guys know any good ones, please start to bring that to me. So and the team, that would be fantastic. But I'm concerned with measuring before we understand, I guess is my response to that.
Right. No, I
I'm
haven't
reading
looked into. I mean, for a while we looked at sharing things with the chart system and all that kind of stuff. But there was a follow-up. Have you thought about how to integrate the Army installation efforts with civil works? I know you and I have talked about some things before. They are kind of apples and oranges, but a lot of things are similar. Water, energy, sustainability, and things. So what about areas in common that can be integrated between the civil works and the Army methods?
So when I first got into the position, Mr. Stockton wanted me to come. He jokes around. He talks about this map of the universe, and he wanted me to go around and really identify all the different sustainable initiatives that were going on around the Corps. Getting hired into this position, I'm sure some people that were doing sustainable initiatives were like, "What is that position? What does it mean?" And I looked at it as adding whatever dimensions to sustainability we were missing that we weren't already doing, and that everything that we were already doing was just going to build up the strength and integrity to do it at a larger scale. And so part of that is definitely coming from the Army side. I think the concept to say that you want to merge sustainability with national security, I think that right there is kind of the hinge that allows us to say, well, what have we done on the military and the Army side, and how can that help us on the civilian side in our civil works landscape? At this point, I had to learn. I came from planning, and my position now is in engineering and construction. And I thought I knew a lot of engineers, but the more and more I was here at headquarters, I realized I still needed to learn a lot more people. I've been fortunate enough that George Lee and Eric Yu and Kelly and Scott Wick and Kenny Simmons have not only become people that I go over there and talk to, but I also am starting to tap on to learn, like, well, what is mega projects? What does that look like? Eric, what are you guys doing over there? And start to really integrate this. The intent with talking with Karen Baker was to specifically talk about this item. And if we reframe or realign sustainability with national security, everything that's already been done on your side of the house or on that side of the house would just support it even further. The integration, it physically has to occur, and that's part of the that's listed in this strategy plan. It's listed as an item that we definitely have to write further information out on. But I think that we're getting there. I think even this webinar, you guys are nice enough to invite me on here when I'm still in a very early stage and clumsy format of all this stuff. So I think things like this will really help us. So I would say that I'm moving out of the inventory stage and we're moving into the integration stage, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and I think that as somebody else pointed out, that the sustainability rating tools, even if they're not a perfect fit, they can be useful for teams to generate ideas. And it kind of reminds me of the old project definition rating index we used to do, maybe still do out in the field. The goal of that was really not to just produce a numeric score, but to walk through all of the issues with the team members to see if you really have resolution and a mutual understanding as to what the solution is to the issues, or if there's some outstanding, unresolved questions still floating around.
Yeah, and I think if asset management and infrastructure strategy was actually, as well as if the dam safety program was interested in this, we could start to see, well, what does it look like if infrastructure strategy uses this system? What does it look like if asset management does? What does it look like in the dam safety program? And so you can start to see, like, okay, here's a strategic thing, right? Infrastructure strategy. Here's using it actually in land and things that you already own, and you're comparing them up against other things that you own, right? Like you're going to divest this, like what's going to go on with this asset that you have, whether it's a structure or whether it's just federally owned land. And then, dam safety is, well, what does it look like when you're looking at a site-specific condition, and how are you going to use it? Like, what is your outcome? What are you measuring? And so I think that, like, part of sustainability is doing things at multiple scales with different time frames associated with them. And so I think when we're going to go to start measuring things, we need to see it, we need to vet some of these tools with a strategic application, somewhat of an asset management application, and then site-specific conditions that might fall a little bit more into site planning, land planning, and master planning.
Right. I think that we're getting close. I'll take a couple more questions if anybody has any, but I wanted to take a moment to point out the button that has the down arrow on it in the lower left corner of where the slides are on the screen.
Okay.
If people want to click that button, they can download the presentation. They can download both the introduction that has the website on there for where they can get the quizzes, and they also have the website on there as to the email address as to where they can submit their quiz answers to get the CEU credit. And then, of course, they can download your slides if they want to look back at the quotes and comments on there, or those really nice graphics. You could probably just stare at some of those pictures of the Mississippi for hours trying to figure out all the different ins and outs and ways that it's changed over the years. But first, I also want to thank you, Heather, for coming across the aisle and presenting with us today. It's good to hear from the Civil Works people, and I hear a lot about how people want us to partner more and get together, and we do have a lot of the same goals and values and intents, and there is a lot of overlap. So hopefully our vertical construction doesn't go horizontal. In that case, we need a structural engineer or a lawyer. But otherwise, horizontal construction is a large part of our environmental impact as well, and we can certainly share stuff. I'll leave this page up for people that want to hang around and download those files. Otherwise, not seeing any more questions, I'll just mute my mic and tell everybody to have a nice day and stop the recording. Do you have any other final comments, Heather?
No, just thanks everybody for listening. And like I said, we're looking for the end of August to have a lot of our early draft stuff out there. So if some of you guys have interest in helping develop any of this further, certainly let me know. Send me any information you want. I'm into cool articles or anything that helps us get a full spectrum lens on some of these issues at this scale. And thanks for listening to me. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.